This is BofC Live, the video and podcast series of Business of Cannabis. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com. Coming up in our BofC Live conversation, we connect with Dr. Daniel Baer, PhD. He's at Humber College in Toronto. He's talking about a campaign they have tackling cannabis misinformation. This is Dr. Daniel Baer. Daniel, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to have you on. Well, first of all, I followed you on Twitter. So, I mean, anybody I can follow on Twitter and then see quasi face-to-face like this is good. Talk a little bit about your role at Humber. We'll start there. Then we'll get to cannabis. Then we'll talk about what you're doing there. Can we do that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a professor in the Faculty of Social and Community Services at Humber College here in Toronto. And my work focuses largely around harm reduction, cannabis policy, a bit on policing. That's sort of where I started off with drugs issues during my doctorate. But really these days I've been focusing on how to try and engage people better about cannabis information and to try and break down some of the old approaches that really focused on fear and stigma and talk about cannabis in a nuanced way, an honest way, and something that's evidence informed.
Yeah, well, it's a good lead into the next question, which is talk about, if you're okay with it, talk about sort of your experience with cannabis and sort of how you came to sort of either study this or work in this or came to it overall.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a long history now. I've been professionally working in cannabis since 2003, but I started off as a medical cannabis consumer in 1998. I was 16 years old and I'd suffered some very severe injuries in a fight. I say fight, I got jumped. Fight makes it sound like I put up more of a defense, but I started using cannabis to deal with the post-traumatic stress that I was experiencing. But I was 16 and it was 1998. And even though we had medical cannabis in California, I couldn't really talk to anybody about it. And, I would see friends being arrested. And what I noticed was that my Black friends were getting arrested and going to juvie or having real serious repercussions, and white friends were getting driven home to their parents with a slap on the wrist. And it just started me down a rabbit hole of trying to understand what this thing was that I was seeing and experiencing and was part of, but couldn't really talk about to any adults around me. I lived in constant fear that I would be outed as a cannabis consumer, and as strange as that sounds now, back then it was my reality. And it's led me on a pathway of researching drugs and cannabis in particular that has taken me in a lot of different areas. I worked in medical cannabis issues with Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana in California, helping them grow their cannabis and understanding the role that cannabis played in the lives of terminally ill people. And then I switched to policing of cannabis. And so I spent a year on the streets with police officers in the UK, seeing how drugs fit into their day-to-day policing activities and the role that drugs sort of filled for them professionally. And then turns out that in a very difficult job, sometimes all you want is a tangible win. And even if that tangible win is a baggie of cannabis, that could really make an officer feel like they had accomplished something. And, since legalization, I've been focusing more, I skipped. I worked with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, for several years, doing drugs and civil rights cases. And now I've been fortunate to live in Canada. I moved here just before legalization, and I've really tried to start going back to my roots a bit and thinking about, what can we do that would have helped 16-year-old me have a better experience with cannabis? Because I'll be honest, I was using cannabis in a problematic way at some points. Because no one had ever sat to me down and said, why are you using cannabis? How do you want to be using cannabis? And how do you want it to benefit you? I just knew that cannabis made me feel better. And I feel like if I had had some more information there, I would have had a better experience with cannabis. And I think overall, I've had a very good experience with cannabis in my life. But I think about the kind of public education where someone who could have been trustworthy and I would have seen as honest and providing scientifically based information could have helped me steer through some of those difficult early years a bit better. And that's kind of what we're trying to do now.
And that actually comes to sort of why we wanted to connect with you now, which is something you've been working on at Humber called Weed Out Misinformation campaign, which sounds like actually the culmination of a lot of your background. Talk a little bit about how it came to be, who the different, I guess, who the different players are and what it actually is.
Yeah, so 2019, we saw there was some grant funding available through the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. And, 5 years ago, I never would have thought to apply to them for a grant, but, times they are changing. And I kind of felt like now was the time. We'd done a pilot project before that. And what we found in that pilot project was that young people that we talked to were feeling very stigmatized, really didn't want to be labeled as a stoner. They wanted to be labeled as the person they were who happens to, use cannabis, and that too often that cannabis identity was put at the forefront of anything else. And so we launched this project, and the idea was very simple. Ask cannabis consumers what kind of information they want to know about cannabis. Ask them what they know already and where they're getting that information, and ask them who they want to deliver the information they're seeking. And the answers that we got back after surveying 1,600 people and then holding focus groups with about another 100 was pretty straightforward. They got information from their peers. They didn't necessarily trust their peers that much, but the groups that they did trust, they didn't have good access to. So they trusted people like academics and doctors, but too often they were being stigmatized by their own doctor. Or, they trusted bud tenders to have good information, but they always kind of worried that bud tenders were just trying to sell them something. And so what we saw was that there was potentially this narrow lane that you could traverse where you could have sort of peer created materials, but also outside experts come in together and form a kind of direct drugs education program that focused on harm reduction, which was, relatively still novel, but also sort of took them towards benefit maximization. How do you think about set and setting in your drugs use? How do you decide what products you want based on what your intended outcome is? And so we built out some initial ideas by giving the data that we had to students at Humber College. And we said, you are best placed as young people. Like, listen, I'm turning 40 soon. And as much as I don't
You're a
feel
young
that,
person too. How dare you?
But we gave it to advertising students at Humber, and we said, come up with some campaign ideas. Here's the data that we have. We took their campaign ideas, had a judging panel with bud tenders and cannabis health experts and consumers. We took the two best campaigns, and we put those in front of another round of focus groups of cannabis consumers, bud tenders, public health professionals. And we really fine-tuned the messaging and the tone, the imagery, everything, so that it was as close to what cannabis consumers themselves said they wanted as we could produce. And so we built out all the campaign materials. We've got brochures on, if you're a first-time consumer, here's a checklist of things to think about. If you're a frequent consumer, here's things you can think about in terms of harm reduction, or why you might want to consider vapes or dabs, depending on what your outcome is. And then, we built out a whole campaign, and it's going to be rolling out. It's online now, and then it'll start appearing in stores soon. I know Canopy Growth has seen the project, and they're really enthusiastic. And while they're not a financial contributor to the project in any way, they've said, listen, we want to get these materials out to some of our stores. And because the campaign is all Creative Commons licensed, we've got everything on the website. People can download the posters, the brochures, everything, and use them as they see fit in their settings. And so we're also really fortunate to be partnered with the Canadian Public Health Association and Canadian Students for Sensible Drugs Policy, both of whom helped us build out our materials and really make sure we had the best evidence base to work from, but then are also hopefully going to disperse these materials. And my goal is twofold. One, I want to see this campaign obviously impact and help people make better choices about cannabis, better being defined as like what works for them, not moralistically like this cannabis is better than the other. But the other thing that we want to do is we want to learn from this. And so we'll be launching a full evaluation, because we want to change the way that we talk about cannabis. Dare is dead, and we want to see what comes next. And maybe this project is really good and people love it and it's wonderful. But even if it's not, even if we get panned and people give us tons of feedback that says you totally screwed up here, you wasted a lot of money, that's all learning. And it's one step away from the old paradigm of drugs discussions, and hopefully into whatever comes next And whatever comes next, hopefully doesn't have stigma and fear and othering and all the other crap that we dealt with first century.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to put a link to the Weed Out information. So weedoutmisinformation.ca is the website. I'll also put the link to it below in the description, but it's really good. I was just cruising around before we came on, and I mean, it's really good information and really engaging. And so all the things you just said, and there's a chill playlist that says enjoy while you wait to come back to a more comfortable level of high. So it's in the green zone of the webpage. So like it is all encompassing, but I think you're right. Like what you just said, like dare is dead. And like, how do we talk about this in a sensible way, but a way that is actually relevant to people who are cannabis consumers or would want to be, right? Like it's without the stigma, it's out the bullshit. I think maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it really is. It's just a more thoughtful approach, especially as, Canada leads the way on this legalization at a federal level. Like people's access to cannabis has gone way up because it's in people's neighborhoods, right? And in a legal way, in a well-lit way, like all those things, more people are going to come in contact with it and sort of non-moralistic ways to sort of think about it and talk about it is super important. So I kudos to the work you're doing, and it's really cool. And I'll post it out, as I said, as we post this. Anything that you're super interested in sort of hearing feedback on, that if people sort of from the business of cannabis world take a look through, that you might want feedback, maybe not publicly on Twitter, but directly to you in your email.
Yeah, my DMs are open for that reason.
Right, that's exactly why.
Yeah. I'd rather get scolded in private than in public. Right. I think from a business perspective, one of the challenges we face in Canada is, of course, the regulation on advertising. Yeah. And so, while that whole side of things is open to a lot of discussion and debate, I think one thing it does is it pushes companies and organizations to think about how they approach cannabis discussions from a well-being, health, social justice side of things. And to make their mark in that way. I mean, you're not making it on how your packaging looks, and you're not making it based on the celebrity endorsement that you have. You're bringing people in by those other things. And so if one of the ways that we can engage consumers is to show that not only are we a company that's here to make profit and sell cannabis, but we're a company that's here to help change the way things are discussed, I think that puts businesses in a pretty good position to catch the attention of consumers. And while that's not the goal of a project like this, I think we'll start seeing more and more discussions related to the impact that cannabis companies have. One thing I think back to is the portrayal of tobacco companies. And if you listen to anti-cannabis messaging, they basically equate every cannabis producer with a tobacco producer. They're nefarious, they just want your money, they don't care about your health. And while that's not true, I think there also needs to be an effort to show that that's not true. And so I don't know that, this campaign is the thing they do, but I think we're going to start seeing more of that as the answer to, we can't advertise and we can't differentiate our product based on, what people see in the store there.
Yeah,
maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. I got no idea.
No, I think you're right. And it's not going to be right unless people try and do interesting, new and thoughtful things, which is why kudos to you and the team at Humber, because I think it's really interesting. We're going to encourage people to check out the website, check out the campaign, connect with you in your DMs with constructive feedback. But we appreciate your time. Thank you for the work you're doing, and we look forward to following up and connecting with you down the road.
Awesome. Thanks for the time to chat.
That was BofC Live. If you like this program, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever you find your podcasts. We're able to do what we do because of ongoing partnerships with Alterna Savings, Cannabis at Work, Cannabis Benchmark, Ken Delta, Gallagher, Headset, and Torque & Main. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com.